No matter who's in the octagon and how you feel about them, at the end of the day, there's one man whose opinion always reigns supreme. UFC President Dana White. The guy's ruled the franchise with an iron fist from day one, and if he has thoughts about a given fight, you'd better believe he'll make a public spectacle of it, especially if those feelings happen to be negative.
He's a big mouth idiot.
So, stay tuned while we list the 10 fights that pissed Dana White off the most, starting with a certain wardrobe malfunction that left him frothing at the mouth. Number 10. Georges St. Pierre versus Johnny Hendricks. The welterweight championship bout between St. Pierre and Johnny Hendricks gave Dana a lot to be pissed about. For starters, him and plenty of UFC fans felt that GSP's split decision victory was total bogus, especially after all the damage Big Rig did up until the final horn, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. After claiming the title, St. Pierre grabbed the mic from Joe Rogan and announced he was hanging up his gloves for a bit.
I have a bunch of stuff in my life happening. I need to hang up my glove for a little bit.
Which just added more fuel to Dana's fire. He tore GSP to shreds in the press conference, saying he took away Johnny's chance at a rematch and left the division without a champion.
That decision that happens, right? You don't just say, hey, I'm going to take a while off, and maybe I'll be back, maybe I won't. You owe it to the fans, you owe it to that belt, you owe it to this company, and you owe it to Johnny Hendricks.
Number 9. Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Thompson. You're going to notice a pattern in this list. Dana hates it when fighters don't go for the kill. The first matchup between Woodley and Thompson at UFC 205 was such a roaring success that most people expected the follow-up fight at UFC 209 to be a no-holds-barred display of aggression. Of course, that's nowhere close to what we got. Wonderboy looked straight up scared of Woodley most of the time, even though the chosen one was all feint with zero follow-through. Dana was pretty disappointed by how things turned out, especially considering how smack Woodley talked in the lead-up.
Woodley came out and made some big claims before the fight that we would have a definitive answer on who's the champion and things like that.
Number 8. Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. The Eagle has a reputation for ferocity, and considering how much everyone loves watching McGregor get a beatdown, their matchup at UFC 229 was guaranteed to be a rating success. Sure enough, the event claimed an easy 2.4 million pay-per-views, and Dana would have been overjoyed if only Khabib had behaved himself after getting McGregor to tap out. The post-match brawl he sparked after jumping over the cage and attacking Conor's people is probably one of the wildest moments in UFC history. And if I'm being honest, it probably helped Khabib get even more famous in the long run. However, Dana's always had a bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to his brand, and he seemed to think that the incident jeopardized the UFC's legitimacy.
Khabib diving over was ridiculous. I mean, you just won a great fight.
To be fair, the governor did literally run out of the arena, so I kinda get where he's coming from here. Number 7. Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. Izzy arrived at the UFC with a bang, enjoying an unstoppable win streak that culminated with him knocking Robert Whittaker out in 2020 and becoming the top-ranked middleweight in the UFC, and that's when Stylebender decided to call out one of the most fearsome fighters to enter the octagon, Yoel Romero. The Soldier of God is an absolute freak of nature, and he should have given Izzy a run for his money. Dana certainly seemed to think so, but imagine his surprise when Romero spent the first 2 minutes dancing around and waiting for his opponent to throw a punch. This snooze fest of a fight barely got off the ground, and while Dana praised Izzy for playing it smart and only going for strategic strikes, he was bitterly disappointed by Romero's weak-kneed showing.
If you're Adesanya, he fought the smart fight. Romero did a lot of moving around and acting like I'm trying to fight, but he never really did.
Number 6. Dennis Hallman versus Brian Ebersol. This 2011 bout saw Hallman brutalized by a flurry of elbows from Ebersol that made the ref force a stoppage in the first round. But that's not quite what Dana had a problem with. Instead, the UFC president felt straight up disgusted by the fact that Hallman wore a pair of shockingly revealing Speedos into the octagon that left half his junk hanging out during the fight. Dana was so pissed that he gave Ebersol a $70,000 bonus for getting that atrocity off the air as fast as possible.
For the first time ever, I'm giving out a thanks for getting those horrifying shorts off TV as soon as possible bonus. And I'm not joking.
And the embarrassment this caused left Superman's career dead in the water. Hallman later told Ariel Helwani that he did it because he lost a bet, but honestly, he probably would have been better off keeping that to himself. Number 5. Francis Ngannou versus Derrik Lewis. Look, we all know about the beef between Ngannou and White, but there's a good chance that this bout between the Predator and the Black Beast is where it all began. Technically speaking, cracks had already started to form after Ngannou lost to Miocic, but his 2018 matchup with Derrik Lewis was his shot at redemption. He had the chance to outpunch a fellow knockout artist and prove he was still at the top of his game. Maybe someone forgot to tell him that. Because the Predator threw all of 17 strikes in the entire fight. He spent about 15 minutes basically starting Lewis down, and his opponent ended up winning by unanimous decision. Dana had billed Francis as a merciless engine of destruction, and it's fair to say that the entire heavyweight division seemed to lose a lot of steam after this second loss. The UFC president took every opportunity to say that Ngannou's inflated ego was to blame, and things just went downhill from there.
Horrible. You know, I think that everybody was talking about him. I thought he was going to be the next guy. I think his ego ran away with him big time. I can tell you that his ego absolutely did run away with him. The minute that happens to you in the fight game, you start to fall apart.
Number 4, Valentina Shevchenko versus Priscilla Catera. If there's one thing Dana hates more than anything else, it's a ref that fails to do their job, and Mario Yamasaki is a textbook example of that. The matchup between Shevchenko and Catera looked one-sided from the get-go, and sure enough, Valentina mercilessly took her opponent apart, landing a whopping 217 strikes, while Priscilla barely got a single punch in. That second-round submission probably saved Catera's life, but a lot of people wondered why Yamasaki didn't just end it sooner. He could have prevented a lot of damage, but in his own words, he wanted to give an underdog the chance to be a warrior. Dana was furious when he heard about this, saying that Yamasaki's one job was to protect the fighters from unnecessary harm.
No, you moron. You're in there to protect her from herself.
And that he put Priscilla in harm's way by letting the bout go into the second round. Needless to say, Mario hasn't worked for the UFC since. Number 3, Kimbo Slice versus Seth Petrelli. Kimbo Slice made a name for himself as a legendary backyard brawler, and Elite XCC decided to use him as their main weapon against the much more popular UFC back in 2008. The guy's built like a brick wall, and his street fighting heroics proved he knew how to throw a punch, but when he went up against a rather mediocre Seth Petrelli, he was knocked out in 14 seconds. After the match, Gary Shaw openly admitted to offering Petrelli a bonus to avoid taking the fight to the canvas, but Petrelli claimed they tried to pay him to go easy on Kimbo. Either way, Dana rightly called this illegal and a disgrace to the sport.
That's fucking illegal.
One of his main issues here was that the promoters clearly tried to manipulate the bets. They thought Kimbo was up for an easy win and that people might bet against him because it's his first time. Clearly the strategy backfired, but for Dana, this was an example of MMA corruption that ruined his efforts to legitimize the sport. Number 2, Anderson Silva versus Demian Maia. The prospect of gaining a foothold in the Middle East was a bit of an obsession for Dana in the late 2000s, and UFC 112 in 2010 was supposed to clinch it once and for all. This was the first MMA fight Abu Dhabi had seen in years, and Dana packed the roster with the cream of the crop. The Silva-Maia bout was supposed to be the event's crown jewel, and Dana was banking on those pay-per-view earnings. The thing is, the bout seemed more like a glorified sparring match, with Silva spending most of it mocking Maia instead of actually trying to win the match. This ended up being the first time Dana straight up walked out of the event, and he'd later say that he owed fans an apology for setting up such an underwhelming encounter.
I'm embarrassed, and I feel like I should apologize to the fans, and
Number 1, Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz. Every entry on this list got Dana red in the face, but this one's personal. He and Chuck Liddell had been friends for years, and when the Iceman finally retired in 2010, Dana literally paid him $400,000 a year just to keep him away from the octagon. He wanted his buddy to be safe, but unfortunately, Oscar De La Hoya decided to become an MMA promoter and lured Liddell back. Liddell had been retired for 8 years at this point, and practice videos showed him getting winded after throwing a couple punches. When the bout commenced, the Iceman was a shadow of his former self, and Ortiz had no trouble knocking him out. There's no telling how much damage yet another knockout did, and Dana put the blame squarely on De La Hoya, saying that the match should never have been sanctioned and that the wannabe promoter was playing with people's lives.
Chuck's almost 50 years old. I love Chuck Liddell, and as a friend, I don't think he should fight.
Do you agree with Dana on these fights? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But that's all for today. See you next time. Till then, remember to protect yourself at all times.